marked by the Lycan king. Prologue. The scent of smoke curled through the air like a warning. Sharp, acrid, and thick with betrayal. Shadows danced violently along the stone corridors of the royal palace, their flickering forms cast by flames devouring centuries of legacy. Boots pounded the marble floor, fast, desperate. The warrior's cloak streamed behind him, slashed by embers. In his arms, swaddled in blood-stained royal silk, was the last hope of a dying dynasty, a child no more than hours old. His golden eyes, wide and unblinking, shimmered like molten fire beneath the hood. Outside, the howls of wolves turned feral. Inside, the screams of loyal guards echoed, cut short one by one. The warrior gritted his teeth, pressing the infant tighter to his chest. "Hold on, little prince," he whispered, voice cracking. "By the moon, I will see you safe." A corridor erupted behind him. Stone shattered, and fire surged forward like a living beast. He ducked through a hidden passage, the kind only those loyal to King Valen would know. But time was running out. She was close. Lady Morwen, highborn, ruthless, once trusted by the crown, now traitor to it. She had orchestrated the bloodbath with elegance and venom, turning Valen's court into a trap and his throne into a grave. In the hidden chamber, the warrior paused. The baby let out a soft, confused whimper, as if sensing the weight of the blood that soaked the air. Then footsteps, deliberate, measured, and the voice, low, cold, female. "I smelled the child's blood," Lady Morwen crooned, stepping into view, her silver blade glinting like moonlight on ice. "I thought I'd missed my chance." The warrior snarled, shifting halfway, for crackling through his skin as claws emerged. But he didn't fully transform, not while he held the air. "You've lost," he growled. "The king may fall, but the bloodline survives." Morwen's smile was a razor edge. "Not if that blood soaks the ground." She moved fast, inhumanly so. Steel met flesh. The warrior twisted, shielding the child as the blade drove through his side. He roared in pain, collapsing to his knees, the baby cradled beneath him. Smoke filled the chamber. Cracks split the walls. The ceiling groaned with the weight of fire and fury. With his final breath, the warrior summoned a whisper of magic, the last enchantment of the old pack. The air shimmered as the shadows swallowed the baby whole, and then the room collapsed. Morwen stood over the crumpled body, eyes wild. "Where is he?" she screamed. But only flames answered. The kingdom awoke to ash. The palace in ruins. King Valen slain. The heir gone. And with him, the hope of a fractured realm. They buried the warrior with honors and buried their future with him. Lady Morwen seized the throne, cloaked in grief, crowned in lies. But deep in the wild, far from palace walls, a golden-eyed child opened his eyes in the arms of strangers, marked by fate, wrapped in silence, forgotten by all, except prophecy. But fate does not forget royal blood, and neither does prophecy. Chapter 1. The wind cut through the Ironclaw territory like knives made of ice, and the sun, weak and pale behind thick gray clouds, offered no warmth. It was the kind of cold that seeped into bones, that reminded even the strongest wolf that nature did not favor the weak. And Elena was considered the weakest of them all. She moved quietly through the frost-bitten brush, her basket swinging lightly against her hip. Every step was deliberate, every breath shallow. The hem of her threadbare cloak clung to her ankles, soaked from trudging through half-melted snow and the dark, black mud of late winter. No one would notice if she didn't return by nightfall. In truth, few would care. The pack had long ago decided her place, and it was beneath their boots. An Omega-born without ties, without strength, and worst of all, without a mate. Elena gathered herbs to heal the wounds of warriors who called her nothing. She scrubbed blood from the floors where alphas had torn each other apart. She stitched meat back into leather for soldiers who never said thank you. And when the moon rose full, She bowed her head and knelt in silence, because even howling was a privilege in Ironclaw. But in the woods, in this stretch of half-forbidden wilderness bordering the ancient lands no one dared speak of, Elena could pretend she wasn't broken. Here, she was not the low Omega. She was simply a girl, with hands that knew the secrets of roots, with eyes that had learned to see what others missed. She crouched beside a cluster of frost-veined echinacea, brushing aside a patch of dying moss to free the roots. Her fingers, pink and raw from the cold, moved with practiced care, and that was when she heard it. Not a rustle, not a growl, a whimper, faint, fragile, almost lost beneath the hush of wind. Elena froze. She lifted her head, slowly, heart thudding. The woods near the border were quiet, too quiet. No bird song, no animal call. Just the brittle creak of snow-heavy branches. She waited. 1 breath. 2. Then it came again. A soft, choking cry, muffled by snow. She rose cautiously, turning toward the sound. Her boots barely made a sound over the forest floor as she followed the noise, heart racing now. Not with fear, but with something deeper, something ancient. The whimper led her to the edge of a hollow, ringed by black stone ruins choked in roots. Trees curved over it like broken spines, their bark scorched with something long forgotten. There, at the base of a fallen pillar, half hidden beneath a frozen tangle of pine needles and ash, a pup, tiny, fragile. His fur, once silver, was matted and streaked with dried blood. His limbs trembled with exhaustion, ribs visible beneath the mess of his fur. But it was his eyes that stole her breath. Gold, not yellow, not amber. Gold like sunlight on the first morning after war. Gold like the legends whispered under breath when the elders thought she wasn't listening. The child of prophecy, the lost heir, the wolf who would return. Elena's breath caught, her pulse deafening in her ears. She took a step forward, her voice barely a whisper. "Hey, it's okay," she said, kneeling low. "I won't hurt you." The pup didn't growl, didn't flee. His eyes locked onto hers with a strange clarity, one far too deep for a creature so small. And beside him, something else. A scrap of silk, torn, dirty, but unmistakable. The royal crest of the Lycan kingdom. Elena stared, her thoughts spinning. This couldn't be real. The Lycan bloodline had died out years ago, slaughtered in a coup no one spoke of anymore. The last heir had burned with the palace, so the stories went, and yet here he was, flesh and fur and breath, a ghost made real. She hesitated. If anyone from Ironclaw found him, they would kill him without hesitation. A male, a stray, worse, a threat to their fragile rule. But if she left him here, he would die. And she had already buried too many things she loved. Slowly, with trembling hands, Elena reached forward. The pup didn't flinch. Instead, he let out a weak breath and collapsed sideways against her palm. That tiny gesture, trust, surrender, broke something open inside her. She scooped him into her arms, cradling him close. His body was ice cold, but he didn't resist. His heartbeat, fast and frail, fluttered against her chest like a bird on the edge of death. "I've got you," she whispered. "I swear it." The wind shifted. Suddenly, silver light spilled across the forest floor, sharp and unnatural. Elena turned and her breath caught. The clouds above had parted, revealing the moon. Not full, not waning, but glowing, brilliant, and for a single impossible moment it pulsed. And on the pup's fur the silver light shimmered, until it seemed to burn, briefly, with gold. A howl rose in the distance, long low, not Ironclaw, not human, something ancient, something terrible, something coming. Elena tightened her grip around the pup, her heart thundering with a panic she didn't yet understand. Behind her the shadows moved. She thought she was saving a broken stray. She didn't know she was carrying the air. And something or someone has awakened. Chapter 2. The forest had a way of hiding things. and Elena had become an expert at hiding herself. In the weeks that followed her discovery of the pup, she learned to move through the world like a shadow. Every footfall was silent, every breath held tight, as though the very act of living in the light could expose her sins. No one had come for her, yet no one knew she was harboring the last piece of the Lycan bloodline, the child who could bring kingdoms to their knees. But Elena knew the truth. Every day that passed, she felt the weight of it, like a stone resting heavy on her chest, a mark on her soul that no one could see but her. The pup was healing, and she couldn't help but marvel at the way he clung to life. Each day his strength returned. His golden eyes, those eerie, radiant eyes, grew less distant, less fearful. There was something unnatural about it. His recovery wasn't just the result of Elena's care. It was as if the very earth itself was willing him to rise, to live, to reclaim what was taken from him. But it wasn't just his recovery that unsettled her. It was the dreams. Elena had never dreamed in such a way before. The boy's face came to her each night, his golden eyes haunting her thoughts even when she was awake. He was older in the dreams, perhaps 5, perhaps 6, but still the same. His features were sharp, regal. His lips, always moving, always whispering words she couldn't understand. But the one thing that always pierced through the haze of those dreams was his voice, low, familiar. "Mother," he would say, his small hands reaching for her, his eyes wide with trust. "Mother." Elena would wake in the dark, her breath ragged. Her heart would ache, a deep, sorrowful longing echoing in the hollow of her chest. She knew it was madness. She was no mother. She was nothing more than a rejected omega in a cruel pack. The idea that she could be something so precious was ridiculous. It was dangerous, but it felt so real. The pup, his small, trembling body curled in her arms, seemed to know her thoughts. His fur, soft as clouds, was beginning to shed the last remnants of the battle he had fought. He gazed up at her with that same unspoken trust, and the bond between them tightened, unbreakable, as though the very fabric of destiny had woven them together. And then one night, her secret was ripped from the safety of shadows. Elena had no way of knowing who had seen her. Perhaps it was the way she'd hesitated when she'd gone to check the traps. Perhaps it was the stray scent of something foreign, something that didn't belong in the dark hollows of Ironclaw's territories, that had lingered in the air longer than it should. All Elena knew was that she had been followed. The footsteps behind her were quiet, too quiet, until they weren't. The crack of a twig broke the silence, and Elena spun, her heart leaping into her throat. There, in the moonlight, stood Kayla, another Omega, eyes sharp, expression bitter. There was no friendship between them, no warmth. Kayla had never been anything but cruel, a reminder of everything Elena lacked. Kayla's lips curled into a cruel smile. "You think you can hide it from us?" she spat, her voice low but filled with venom. "You've been sneaking off for weeks, hiding something in that den of yours." Elena felt the cold sweat form on the back of her neck, her mind racing. She had no time to hide the pup, no time to run. The trap was set. "I don't know what you mean," Elena said, her voice trembling but steady. Kayla took a step forward, eyes gleaming with malice. "Don't play coy, Elena. We all know you're hiding something. We can smell it. You can't run from us. Not forever." Before Elena could respond, Kayla darted forward, grabbing her arm in a vice-like grip, dragging her toward the den. "No," Elena gasped, struggling. "Kayla, please. You don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," Kayla interrupted, her sneer growing. "You're harboring an enemy's blood, a traitor, a threat to all of us. You've made your choice, Elena." With that, Kayla shoved open the flap of the small, hidden den where Elena had kept the pup safe, and Elena's heart stopped. There, in the center of the room, nestled in the warmth of blankets and furs, was the child. Elena's world tilted, her vision spinning. She couldn't let them see him, couldn't let them find out the truth. But it was too late. Look at this." Kayla cried, pointing with shaking hands at the pup, now awake, trembling, his golden eyes flashing in the dim light. "You've been hiding this monster, this Lycan heir." Her voice rose in pitch, gaining strength with every word. "Traitor, traitor to the pack. You think we won't see through your lies." Elena's breath caught in her throat. She reached for the pup, but Kayla was already stepping back, calling out for the others. "The traitor has been found. We've caught her red-handed." Footsteps approached, heavy, commanding. The pack leaders, alphas and betas, stormed into the den with fury burning in their eyes. "You've been deceiving us, Elena." Alpha Roderick's voice was a cold, guttural growl, the accusation clear in his tone. "Harboring an enemy's blood? What do you think we are? Weak." Elena's knees went weak. She wanted to speak, to beg for mercy, to explain, but no words came. How could she explain that the pup wasn't a monster? How could she tell them that he was just a child who had been abandoned like her, a child who needed love and protection? "Answer me." Roderick bellowed, his fists clenched, his fury barely contained. I couldn't leave him," Elena whispered, her voice breaking. "He's just a child. I couldn't." "Enough." Kayla's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Tomorrow the traitor shall be exiled to Black Hollow." Elena's chest tightened as the words struck her like a blow. Black Hollow, the forsaken place, the land where no one returned. She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The weight of the accusation crushed her. There was no escape. The pack had already decided her fate. As the leaders moved to bind her hands, Elena's gaze flicked to the pup, his golden eyes wide, his fragile body trembling in the corner. This wasn't over. Not yet. Elena had tried to save the boy, to protect him, to protect them both from the world that would tear them apart. But in the end, it was kindness that had doomed her. And now, as she was led away, shackled and broken, she could only pray that the child would survive the coming storm. Chapter 3. The stench of decay was the first thing Elena noticed when she was shoved into the prison cell. The air was thick with rot, dampness, and the acrid scent of mold that seemed to seep from the very stone walls, twisting itself into her lungs. Each breath was a struggle, but that wasn't the worst of it. The worst was the cold. Black Hollow was nothing more than a tomb beneath the earth, a place where souls were forgotten, buried alive to pay for their sins. The stone walls were jagged, uneven, and the shadows seemed to stretch long and thick, as if the darkness itself sought to swallow her whole. The faint glow of distant torchlight barely reached the corners of her cell, leaving everything bathed in an oppressive gloom. Elena shivered. The chains around her wrists clinked as she tested their hold. Her arms, though numb from the cold, were already raw from the enchanted iron. The magic embedded in the chains burned like fire, every touch a reminder that she was not to escape. Not that she could escape. The ground beneath her was damp, soaked with the moisture that perpetually clung to the underground prison. She sank to her knees, the cold biting through the thin rags she had been left in. Her mind was a fog of disbelief. She had been exiled, cast away like trash. She could still hear the echoes of their voices, the harsh, condemning words. Traitor. Enemy's blood. The weight of the accusations crushed her, but it wasn't the words that hurt most. It was the loss of everything she had ever known. The pup, her heart twisted at the thought of him. She had failed him. She had promised to protect him. Yet now here she was, shackled in a cold, forgotten hole in the earth. She didn't know where he was, if he was even alive. Would they kill him? Would he die alone in the dark? A tear slid down her cheek, but Elena wiped it away quickly. She wouldn't let herself break, not here. Not in Black Hollow. She wasn't just a broken Omega anymore. She was something more now, something dangerous. She would find a way to survive. For him. The darkness pressed in on her, swallowing everything, and for a moment, Elena let herself drift. She could hear the howls of the pack above her, distant and mournful. They were nothing more than echoes, a reminder of her abandonment. But then footsteps, heavy, approaching. Her heart lurched in her chest, and she forced herself to her feet. She had to stay alert. No one came down to Black Hollow unless they had a purpose. It was rare for anyone to come down here at all. But when they did, it was never a visit of mercy. A figure appeared at the end of the corridor, a silhouette moving with purpose. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected anyone to visit. She had been abandoned to rot, to die. Yet, here they were, coming for her. The figure stopped at the entrance to her cell, the torchlight flickering across his face. Elena's heart skipped a beat. It was Roderick, the Alpha, his expression stone-cold as he looked down at her. He didn't speak at first, just surveyed her with eyes that saw far more than she was comfortable with. "You've been here long enough to know what happens to traitors," he said, his voice low, the finality of his tone echoing off the stone walls. Elena tried to stand taller, despite the chains binding her to the ground. "I'm not a traitor," she whispered fiercely, her voice cracking from the strain of the past days. "I was only trying to protect him." Roderick's lip curled in a bitter sneer. "Protect who? The pup? The bastard child of the Lycan kingdom? You've already doomed yourself. We've all heard the rumors. Do you think you'll find mercy? Or will you rot down here with the others?" Elena's stomach twisted at the mention of the rumors. She couldn't stop herself from glancing down at her wrists, the chains biting into her skin. "You don't understand," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "He's just a child. I couldn't leave him." For a long moment, Roderick didn't respond. His eyes bored into her, as if trying to measure her worth. But then, with a grunt of annoyance, he turned on his heel and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. "Elena," he called over his shoulder, "enjoy your stay in Black Hollow. I don't think anyone will come looking for you." Elena's heart sank as the sound of his footsteps faded into silence. As the darkness pressed in once more, the stone walls closing around her, she could feel the weight of her situation pressing heavier. No one was coming. She was alone. But what if someone did? Her thoughts were interrupted by a flicker of movement in the corner of her cell, a whisper of sound like a breath, a faint growl. Elena's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't alone. And then, as if the world itself had heard her prayers, the air shifted, crackling with the faintest of tension. She felt it before she saw it, the sudden presence of something powerful, something immense. It wasn't human. It wasn't wolf. It was something ancient. And then from the shadows came the low growl, a sound that made her blood run cold. And so Elena was left alone in her cell, shackled by magic, bound by fate. But even in the darkness of Black Hollow, something stirred, something far greater than her fear, something ancient that had waited for centuries. Above the ground, in the heart of the Lycan kingdom, whispers were spreading like wildfire. Word of the golden-eyed pup had reached the ears of the capital, and the king himself had heard it. King Valen stood alone in his chambers, the dark shadows of the room stretching long as he stared at the flickering flames of the hearth. His heart, which had never truly healed from the loss of his son, clenched painfully in his chest. The rumors were maddening. The whispers of a child with eyes like his own, a child who carried his blood, and those eyes, golden, like the sun. It had to be a lie. It couldn't be real. His son, his beloved son, was lost to the fire. His son was dead. But something in him, a deep, gnawing part, refused to believe it. Something ancient, buried deep within the king's soul, stirred as the memories of loss and regret flooded his mind. "Bring me the girl," Valen said, his voice steady, but there was an unmistakable tremor beneath it. "I want the truth before Morwen hears of this." His eyes narrowed, burning with a cold fury that only a father who had lost everything could know. The king's command echoed through the halls of the palace, and as the flames flickered in the hearth, they burned brighter. For what had been lost would soon be found. Chapter 4. The journey from Black Hollow to the palace above ground was a blur. The cold air pressed against Elena's face, seeping into her bones even more deeply than the enchanted chains that bound her. She was barely aware of the rough hands that yanked her from her cell and marched her through the labyrinthine corridors, only that the air seemed thicker here, filled with tension, as though the very walls of the palace held their breath in anticipation of her arrival. Her heart beat like a drum in her chest, wild and frantic. What awaited her? She had never been to the palace, never imagined she would stand before the king. But here she was. With every step, her thoughts raced back to the pup. Where was he now? Was he safe? The fear gnawed at her insides, a constant ache that she could not push aside. But as the guards led her up the winding staircase, through the grand halls filled with gilded tapestries and shimmering chandeliers, she could feel something else creeping into her thoughts. Something far deeper, a whisper of fate. She couldn't place it, but there was an undeniable pull in the air. It was as if the universe itself had shifted, altering the very course of her life. The shadows seemed to reach out toward her, drawing her in, as if she was being guided by invisible hands. And then the door opened. The king's chamber loomed before her, dark and imposing. Two massive doors, heavy and carved with intricate symbols, stood wide. Beyond them was a room bathed in flickering torchlight, shadows dancing across the stone walls. King Valen was seated at the far end, his figure silhouetted by the light of a great hearth. His back was to her, but Elena could feel his presence like a storm gathering on the horizon. Her breath caught in her throat. He was every bit the ruler that the rumors described, a man who carried the weight of his kingdom like a shroud, his every movement deliberate, his every word a command. But there was something more beneath that exterior, a depth to him that was at once terrifying and magnetic. A voice, low and commanding, broke the silence. Bring her forward. Elena didn't move at first. Fear gripped her, her legs refusing to take the first step. What would he do to her? She had betrayed him, hadn't she? She had sheltered the pup, the son of his blood, and now the consequences of her actions had come home to roost. But despite the trembling in her limbs, she forced herself to step forward. She couldn't show weakness. Not now. The guards pushed her roughly toward the center of the room, and she found herself standing before the king. Valen rose from his throne, the movement slow and deliberate, as though every muscle in his body was weighed down by something heavy, something tragic. His eyes, those golden eyes, locked onto hers with a piercing intensity that made her breath hitch. Her heart skipped a beat. Elena! His voice was a low, rumbling sound, like the growl of a wolf on the hunt. His gaze never wavered from her, the heat of it sinking into her skin. Elena felt herself recoil, but she forced herself to stand tall. I didn't mean any harm, she whispered, her voice trembling. I only wanted to protect him. Him, Valen's voice softened as if tasting the word. He took a step closer, and Elena's pulse raced. There was something in his expression, a flicker of recognition, or perhaps something deeper, something ancient, that stirred inside him. The king's eyes studied her, then moved to the chains that bound her wrists. You are an Omega, he said, his voice hardening. Yet you carry the scent of something more, something royal. He took another step toward her, his presence overwhelming. And you harbor the pup, the one they speak of, the child with the golden eyes. Elena flinched, her heart hammering in her chest. He knew everything, but she didn't know what to say. How could she explain herself? How could she make him understand? Elena's words faltered. He's just a child. I couldn't leave him to die. Valen's gaze never wavered. He reached out, his hand hovering inches from her face, and Elena froze. The touch of a king, the touch of fate. She could feel the weight of his eyes upon her, searching her, as though looking deep into her very soul. "You think I would have let him die?" Valen's voice dropped lower, a growl escaping his chest. "You do not understand, girl. You cannot know the weight of the throne, the weight of the bloodline. The kingdom depends on it. Everything I've fought for." He trailed off, his breath coming in uneven bursts. There was pain there. Beneath the steel, beneath the rage, there was something else. A deep, consuming grief that threatened to overwhelm him. "Elena!" he whispered, his voice low and filled with a strange intensity. "Tell me, where is the boy? Where is my son?" His words hit her like a blow to the chest. Her breath caught, and for a long moment she couldn't respond. The king's son? The thought was almost too much to bear, but the look in his eyes, golden and filled with so much pain, told her that it wasn't a lie. She could feel the truth of it, seeping into her very bones. This man, this king, was more than just a ruler. He was a father who had lost everything. And now he stood before her, searching for the one thing he had thought was lost forever. "Elena!" he pressed, his voice thick with urgency. "Where is he?" Her eyes flickered to the floor, the shame of her actions gnawing at her. She couldn't lie to him. Not anymore. I don't know where he is," she whispered, the words barely escaping her lips. "But I know he's alive. I know it in my bones." Valen's gaze softened for a fraction of a second, but then it hardened again, the king's mask returning. He turned to his beta, who had been standing in the shadows, watching silently. "Run the blood test," Valen ordered, his voice low but full of authority. "If it's him, everything changes." The king's words hung in the air, heavy with a promise, one that would shatter everything. For if it was true, if the child was indeed his son, then the course of the kingdom and Elena's fate would be forever altered. Chapter 5. The air in the palace felt thick with expectation, suffocating even. Elena sat in a small chamber beneath the shadow of the king's grand tower, a place far removed from the warmth and light of the royal halls. Though she had been granted a semblance of freedom, if one could call it that, there were always eyes upon her, guards in every corner, and watchful eyes from the farthest reaches of the palace. They all seemed to know now, know what she had known all along. The pup was the heir, the son of King Valen, lost for so many years. The confirmation had come swiftly. A blood test. The evidence was undeniable. Her heart clenched at the thought of the boy, her boy now. She had raised him, sheltered him, cared for him when no one else would. And now, she was part of something far bigger than she could comprehend. Something that had been written long before she had ever set foot in the palace. A prophecy whispered on the wind, carried by the gods themselves. The weight of it pressed down on her chest like a stone. Elena's fingers tightened around the fabric of her simple tunic, the sound of the guards outside her door making her jump slightly. She was no longer a prisoner in the dark halls of Black Hollow, but neither was she free. She was nothing more than a pawn in a game she had never chosen to play. The guards watched her every move, their eyes cold and unfeeling. They had no kindness, no warmth to offer her. Elena understood why. She was the one who had hidden the child, the one who had broken the law and defied the throne. She had no place here, not truly. But still she stayed. She stayed because she had to, because she couldn't leave him. The door to her chamber opened, and in walked a servant. He was an older man, his face lined with age and wisdom. He carried a tray of food, his eyes casting a furtive glance at her as he set it down on the small table beside the bed. "Elena," he said, his voice low, almost apologetic. "The king wishes to see you." Her heart skipped a beat. King Valen. She hadn't seen him since the day he had confirmed the truth of the boy. Since the day he had looked into her eyes and seen something more than a mere Omega girl. He had seen her, the woman who had cared for the one thing he had lost, the one thing that could save his kingdom. She nodded silently, and the servant stepped back, allowing her a moment to gather herself. The fear still clung to her, but it was a different kind of fear now. It was a fear of the unknown, a fear of what might happen if she failed, if she couldn't protect the pup, if she couldn't protect him from what the prophecy had foretold. The prophecy, she could feel its weight. It was everywhere, in the walls, in the air, in the very heartbeat of the palace. Elena had heard whispers of it, whispers in the shadows of the royal court, whispers of the child who would one day claim the throne, whispers of the woman who would stand at his side. Her side. She didn't understand it, but she felt it deep in her bones. She was part of this, and the gods, it seemed, had a plan for her. Elena stood, smoothing out the creases in her tunic, and made her way to the door. The guards outside didn't speak, but they watched her carefully as she passed, their eyes trained on her every movement. She felt them, the weight of their gaze, but she didn't let it slow her. She had no time for fear now. The king had called for her, and she had to go. The halls were eerily quiet as she made her way toward the royal chamber. There was an unnatural stillness in the air, as though the palace itself was holding its breath. When she reached the door, a servant opened it for her without a word, his expression blank as he motioned for her to enter. Inside, the room was bathed in the soft, golden glow of candlelight. King Valen stood by the hearth, his back to her, as he stared into the flames. "Elena!" He spoke her name, a low murmur that sent a shiver down her spine. "Come." She stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. She was so close to him now, so close she could almost feel the heat radiating from his body. He was tall, taller than most men, with the power and presence of a king. And yet there was a vulnerability in him now, a sorrow that haunted the depths of his golden eyes. "Elena!" Valen repeated, his voice filled with something she couldn't place. It was a softness she had never expected from him, a gentleness that cut through the walls he had built around himself. She met his gaze, her breath catching in her throat. There was a connection between them now, something undeniable. The fate of the boy was intertwined with her own, and it was a bond she couldn't escape. But she couldn't help wondering if that bond meant something more. "I've had visions," she said quietly, surprising herself with the admission. Valen turned to face her fully now, his gaze sharp. "Visions?" he asked, his voice low, filled with interest. Elena nodded, the words spilling from her before she could stop them. "Of past kings, of the blood moon, and of a wolf goddess whispering in my ear." "She told me," she hesitated, unsure whether she should share what she had been told. The words of the goddess echoed in her mind. "He is not just the heir. You are his fate." The king's eyes darkened at the mention of the wolf goddess. "Fate," he repeated, the word tasting foreign on his tongue. His gaze softened, but the intensity didn't waver. "Do you believe it?" "I don't know," Elena whispered, her voice barely a breath. "But I can feel it, deep inside. We're connected, Valen. The pup and I. And it's more than just fate. It's as if," her voice faltered, "it's as if the gods themselves have bound us together." The silence between them stretched, heavy and taut. Then Valen stepped forward, his hand reaching for her. "Elena!" His voice was a whisper now, the intensity of it taking her by surprise. He cupped her face in his large hand, his touch gentle but insistent. "Do you understand what this means? The prophecy, it's real. It's all real." Elena swallowed, her mind racing. What was he saying? What was he going to do? The door to the chamber suddenly burst open, the sound echoing through the room. Lady Morwen, her eyes cold and fierce, stepped into the room. She snarled as she locked eyes with Elena, her lips curling into a cruel, knowing smile. "Then we kill the girl before the prophecy binds them," Lady Morwen declared, her voice thick with malice. And just like that, the fragile thread of Elena's hope unraveled. In the darkness, Lady Morwen's words hung heavy, a deadly promise, one that threatened to rip apart the fragile bond between the Omega girl and the lost heir of the kingdom. Chapter 6. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she cradled the pup, the small golden-eyed boy nestled in the crook of her arm. The connection between them had deepened in ways she couldn't fully understand, and yet it felt undeniable. She had seen the way he looked at her, those wide, innocent eyes filled with trust, a trust that had been forged in the shadows of the past, in the hidden places where no one would dare venture. In the quiet of her chamber, she whispered to him, a lullaby that her own mother had sung to her when she was small, though she couldn't remember the words fully. She hummed, the melody coming naturally to her lips, soothing the boy to sleep. The warmth of him, the small weight of his body against hers, was a comfort. It was an anchor in the swirling chaos of her world, one that had tilted upside down the moment she had found him in the woods. The prophecy, the king, the palace, none of this had been her choosing, and yet here she was. She glanced up at the window, her eyes tracing the edges of the moon, which was beginning to rise in the sky. The darkened night seemed to wrap around the castle like a shroud. It was a reminder of what had been lost, of what was yet to come. Elena felt the weight of it all, pressing on her chest, her heart heavy with something she couldn't name. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps outside her chamber door. She stiffened instinctively, her body alert, every muscle tensed. Her gaze flickered down to the boy. His breathing was steady, calm. The footsteps came closer. The door opened, and there stood King Valen. He hadn't knocked. He never did. It was as though he had become accustomed to her being at his command, as though the thin barrier of walls and doors didn't matter. The king was a force of nature, one who moved through the world like the storm he was, untamed, powerful, relentless. He stopped just inside the doorway, his golden eyes flickering to the boy in her arms before locking onto her face. "Elena!" he said, his voice as commanding as ever. But there was something different now, something soft. It was almost imperceptible, but it was there, lingering in the depth of his gaze. Her heart stuttered in her chest. She had seen that look before, the way his eyes softened when he saw the child, when he realized that this boy was his son. The weight of that realization had changed the king. In some ways it had broken him, made him vulnerable in a way that no one would ever have expected. And yet it had also made him more determined, more dangerous. "Elena!" he repeated, taking a step closer. "Are you well?" She swallowed, her voice soft as she answered. "Yes, your majesty." "The pup is—" she hesitated, her fingers gently brushing through the boy's hair. "He's healing. I think he's starting to remember." Valen's eyes flickered with something akin to sorrow, and his jaw clenched as he took another step toward her. "There's much to remember," he said, his voice low, thick with something Elena couldn't quite place. Too much for any child to bear. She glanced at him, her chest tightening with the unspoken words hanging between them. She knew what he meant. The boy's existence, the prophecy, the bloodline, the weight of the throne. It was too much for anyone to bear, and yet the boy had to. He had no choice. "Elena!" Valen said again, his voice now more somber. "You've given him a chance at life. I won't forget that." She shook her head, slowly, her hands tightening around the boy. "I didn't do it for you. I did it for him." His golden eyes met hers, and for a moment the walls between them seemed to dissolve. But only for a moment. "I know," Valen murmured. A long silence passed, the weight of their shared responsibility between them. Elena could feel the tension between them, this strange, unspoken bond that had formed between them. It was fragile, frail, but it was there. She could feel it every time their eyes met, every time he stepped into her space. And in that silence, something shifted in the air, a thickening of the tension that held them together, but also kept them apart. "I'll make sure he is safe," Valen said finally, his voice gruff with a promise. "The throne has many enemies, Elena, and there are those who would stop at nothing to see him, see us destroyed." The threat in his voice was unmistakable, and for a moment Elena couldn't breathe. She had known it was coming. She had felt the darkness lurking around them, the whispers of those who wanted to see the throne fall, to see the bloodline erased. But now it was real. "I know," she whispered, her voice steady despite the fear beginning to stir in her chest. I won't let them take him. Valen's gaze softened again, the vulnerability in him flickering for just a moment before he reined it back in. You're stronger than you know, he said quietly, and I won't let anyone harm you either. Elena met his gaze, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and longing. But before she could respond, a knock sounded at the door. The tension between them shattered instantly. Valen's expression hardened, and without a word he turned to face the door. Elena watched as he lifted his hand in a gesture that commanded the door to be opened. A servant stepped inside, her face pale and anxious. "My lord, my lady!" The servant bowed quickly, her eyes darting between the two of them. There's something you must see." Valen straightened, his eyes narrowing. "What is it?" "The court." The servant hesitated, swallowing hard. "There are whispers, my lord. They say that the Omega girl is a threat to the throne. They say," her voice trailed off, fear settling deep in her words. "They say the boy is cursed." Elena's stomach twisted. She had felt the murmurs, heard the whispers, but this was more than she could have imagined. Valen's jaw clenched. His golden eyes burned with an intensity that sent a shiver down Elena's spine. He turned slowly to face the servant. "Who?" Valen demanded. "Who is behind this?" The servant's eyes dropped to the floor, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lady Morwen, my lord. She's the one stirring the pot. She's the one poisoning the court." Elena's breath caught in her throat. Lady Morwen, the woman who had once been Valen's closest ally, the woman who now wanted nothing more than to see Elena destroyed. The woman who had been spreading lies, weaving a web of deceit, and turning the wolves of the court against her. Valen's expression darkened. His eyes flared with a dangerous fury, and his voice was low, threatening. "If Morwen dares to play these games, I will deal with her." The servant nodded quickly, fear evident in her eyes. "There's more, my lord. The rumors they've spread beyond the court. Some are speaking of dark magic, of rituals meant to sever the boy from the bloodline entirely." Elena's heart stilled, and her voice faltered. "Sever the bloodline?" The servant nodded grimly. "If she succeeds, your majesty, the boy will die." And so, as the shadows of the palace deepened, Elena found herself caught in a dangerous web. A web spun by Lady Morwen, woven with lies, betrayal, and dark magic. And now, the stakes had never been higher. Not only was the fate of the kingdom at risk, but the very life of the boy she had sworn to protect. Chapter 7. The moon hung heavy and unforgiving in the sky, casting its cold, silvery light across the forest floor. Elena stood at the edge of the woods, the wind whipping through her hair, her breath quick and shallow as she listened to the rustling of leaves. Every shadow seemed to pulse with malevolent energy, and though she was surrounded by trees, she felt no protection here, only a sense of foreboding that threatened to swallow her whole. In her arms, the child stirred slightly, his golden eyes flashing open for a brief moment before closing again. He was growing weaker. Elena could feel it. The connection that had once been so vibrant between them was now a distant thread, fraying with each passing moment. "She has him," Elena whispered under her breath. "Morwen has taken him." Valen's voice, low and tight with fury, came from beside her. "We will get him back. If she thinks she can break this bloodline, she's gravely mistaken." He stepped closer, his body radiating power and purpose, his kingly presence undeniable even in the face of fear. Elena's eyes locked onto him, her heart pounding. His determination mirrored her own. This was no longer just a fight for the child. This was a fight for their future, for everything. He clenched his jaw, eyes scanning the shadows around them as though willing the forest to give up its secrets. "Morwen will pay for this." "She's going to kill him," Elena said, her voice trembling with urgency. "You don't understand. She'll sever him from everything. His soul, his birthright. She'll destroy him. She's going to make sure he can never fulfill the prophecy. Valen's eyes softened just for a moment and then hardened again. Not if I can help it. They were both alphas in this moment. He, the king of a kingdom under threat. She, the lone omega who had defied everything to protect a child she barely knew. Neither of them had the luxury of hesitation. Valen led the way, his footsteps steady, each movement a manifestation of the rage burning inside him. Elena followed closely, her senses heightened. The air was thick with danger. The sound of wolves howling echoed in the distance, morbidly distant, like the very winds carried with them the promise of death. They reached the clearing, and the sight before them made Elena's blood run cold. There, in the center of a cursed altar, surrounded by black stone pillars etched with dark runes, stood Lady Morwen. She was chanting in a language Elena could not understand, her voice rising and falling with a rhythm that seemed to shake the very ground beneath their feet. The child was there, his tiny body stretched out on the cold stone of the altar, his hand bound, the faint glow of his royal mark flickering weakly in the moonlight. Morwen's eyes, those cruel, calculating eyes, met Elena's as she stopped in her tracks. A slow, wicked smile curled at the corners of the older woman's lips. "I see you've arrived just in time," she purred, her voice smooth, dangerous, like poison on the air. "But it's too late. This child is no longer of any use to you. His soul will never belong to your bloodline. I'll see to that." Elena's chest tightened, her heart pounding. The bond she shared with the boy throbbed painfully, as though it, too, knew the truth, that the time to save him was running out. She stepped forward, her voice trembling with desperation. "You won't get away with this, Morwen. You can't sever what's destined. You don't have the power." Morwen chuckled, her laugh like the rustling of dead leaves. "You think I don't understand destiny, girl?" she spat, her eyes flashing with cold fury. "I've seen what happens to those who are chosen to fulfill prophecies. They are nothing but pawns in a game they can never win. This boy, this prince, he'll die before he ever reaches the throne." Valen growled, his muscles rippling beneath his tunic as his wolf roared within him. He stepped forward, his eyes flashing with primal fury. "I'll make sure you regret this, Morwen. You've crossed a line that will never be forgiven." But Morwen wasn't intimidated. She simply raised her hands, her fingers crackling with dark energy. And the wolves around her, her rogue wolves, snarled and circled, ready to fight. Elena felt her pulse quicken as she reached for the dagger at her side, the cold metal sending a shiver up her spine. She wasn't a warrior, not like Valen, but she had learned to fight to protect what she loved. Valen was already in motion, moving with the speed and grace of a king who had been forced into too many battles. He leapt toward the closest wolf, his claws ripping through flesh and fur as his body transformed, fur erupting from his skin, his teeth elongating as he fought in his true form. Elena followed his lead, but her mind was focused on the child, the boy who was still bound to the altar, still fading before her eyes. She rushed forward, her heart in her throat, ignoring the chaos around her. And then Morwen's voice, cold and unforgiving, echoed through the clearing. "By the old gods," she intoned, her hands raised high above the child, her fingers tracing the symbols in the air like an incantation. "Let the bloodline break. Let the child's essence be severed from the throne." Elena's blood ran cold as Morwen slashed open the boy's palm with a dagger, and the blood began to pool, falling like droplets of dark magic into the black flame beneath the altar. "No," Elena cried, her voice breaking. She couldn't let this happen. Not after everything they had been through. Not after all they had sacrificed. The child's body convulsed, his golden eyes flashing open in agony. His cry was a raw, animalistic wail that seemed to reverberate through the earth itself. Elena could feel his pain, his soul trembling as though it were being torn from him. She lunged, but the rogue wolves were upon her in an instant, pulling her back, their claws digging into her flesh as they pinned her to the ground. Valen was in the midst of the battle, his form shifting from wolf to man, tearing through the ranks of Morwen's wolves, but he couldn't reach them in time. Morwen's chant grew louder, more insistent, and the boy's scream was a haunting melody that would stay with Elena forever. And then, a crack of thunder, loud and deafening, split the sky above them. The forest shook, and the black flame beneath the altar flared to life, its light bright and burning as though it were a beacon for something ancient, something that had been waiting. In that moment, as the world seemed to fall into chaos around them, Elena knew something deep in her soul. It wasn't just the boy's bloodline at stake. It was hers too. The battle for the child's soul was not over yet. Morwen's magic was powerful, ancient, and terrible. But something else was stirring, something even darker than the power of the rogue wolves. As the flames flickered and the chanting continued, Elena felt an overwhelming sense of dread settle over her. The prophecy, the bloodline, everything that had been foretold was on the verge of unraveling. Chapter 8. The moon hung high above the cursed altar, its cold, silvery glow piercing the veil of darkness that had descended upon the clearing. The wind had stopped entirely, as if the world itself held its breath in the wake of what was about to unfold. Elena's heart pounded in her chest, the blood coursing through her veins a thunderous reminder of the battle at hand. She was a mere heartbeat away from losing everything. Losing the child, losing Valen, losing herself. And yet a cold, quiet resolve settled over her. I will not fail him. The boy's cries echoed in her mind, his spirit tangled with hers. A bond she couldn't sever, wouldn't sever. She had always been told that she was nothing more than an omega, a lowly creature, cursed to be weak, always in service to those with true power. But that had never been the truth. Not now. Not anymore. Morwen's chanting swirled through the air, a dark, intoxicating rhythm that seemed to steal away every shred of hope. The rogue wolves circled, their eyes gleaming with the promise of violence. But Elena barely noticed them anymore. All she could see was the altar, the boy, and the ancient woman who sought to destroy everything. Lady Morwen stood at the center of it all, her form drenched in the blackness of the ritual, her hands raised high, weaving a spell so old, so vile, that the air itself seemed to tremble in fear. She had come for the child's soul. She had come for the throne. And now, Elena would stop her. Valen's voice echoed through the clearing, a low growl laced with fury. Elena, get back! But Elena didn't hear him. She couldn't. She was too far gone. The child's golden eyes flashed one last time, and her heart broke. With a cry of desperation, Elena threw herself forward. She ran, no, she launched herself into the heart of the ritual fire, her body a blur of motion, her heartbeat sinking with the thrum of magic that pulsed in the air. The fire enveloped her, searing her skin, burning her very soul. But it didn't destroy her. No, it awakened her. She gasped, her breath coming in sharp, agonizing pulls, as something ancient and powerful stirred deep inside of her. It was as if the world itself had shifted beneath her feet, as if the earth was groaning in response to her defiance. The pain in her body twisted and stretched, but it didn't break her. She felt alive. The power surged, wild, untamed, and free. Her blood burned like liquid fire, and a presence, vast and untouchable, swirled around her. It whispered to her in ancient tongues, and though she couldn't understand the words, she felt them. The moon-blessed had awoken. A roar, primal and unyielding, erupted from deep within her chest. Her body shook with the power of it, her eyes glowing a radiant, otherworldly silver as the magic of the moon-blessed poured through her veins. She felt the weight of the centuries press down on her, the ghosts of long-dead queens, warriors, and protectors, all bound together in the ancient bloodline that now surged within her. Her senses sharpened. Every sound, every breath, every heartbeat, it all became crystal clear. She could feel the very pulse of the world, the ebb and flow of life itself. She was no longer Elena the Omega. She was something more. The altar's flames roared higher, and in the midst of the chaos, Elena found herself standing. Stronger, faster, more than human. The pain she'd once known, the isolation, the helplessness, it was gone, replaced by something ancient, something fierce. And now it was time to face Morwen. The dark sorceress stood at the center of the fire, her eyes wide in shock as she witnessed Elena's transformation. The chanting faltered, the magic wavered, but Morwen, ever the deceiver, quickly recovered, her lips curling into a sneer. "You think this makes you strong?" she hissed, her voice thick with venom. "You're nothing but a shadow of what came before." Elena met her gaze with a cold fury that sent a shiver down Morwen's spine. "You've underestimated me, witch," she said, her voice steady, a new power thrumming through every word. She stepped forward, her bare feet silent against the ground, the flames of the ritual parting around her like a storm yielding before the wind. Without another word, Elena lunged. The battle was fast, brutal, a blur of magic and raw strength. Elena's new form was fluid, quick, her every movement a strike of lightning. She was like the moon itself, untouchable and fierce, a force of nature. Morwen met her head-on, summoning dark energy, her hands glowing with malevolent power. But Elena was faster. With a snarl, she swiped through the air, her claws elongating with a sharp, deadly snap. The two women collided, their bodies crashing together in a whirlwind of power and rage. Elena could feel the heat of Morwen's magic, but it was nothing compared to the fire that burned within her own soul. She was the moon-blessed. She was the guardian spirit of the first Lycan queen. She was unstoppable. The magic clashed, sparks flying as the two forces collided, but Elena kept pushing, refusing to yield. Morwen snarled, her eyes flashing with fury as she summoned more power, attempting to overpower the moon-blessed. But Elena's fury was a force that could not be contained, not by Morwen's dark sorcery. She surged forward, her body glowing with an ethereal light as she struck the older woman with all the force of the storm. Morwen staggered back, her power faltering for just a moment, and that moment was all Elena needed. With a final, vicious swipe, Elena tore through the sorceress's defenses, sending Morwen crashing to the ground. The air crackled with the remnants of magic, and the ground beneath them shook. For a moment there was silence, and then Morwen's body erupted in dark flame, her cries of agony mingling with the roar of the fire as she was consumed by it. The magic died, and the flames that had once roared so fiercely now flickered and dwindled into nothing. Elena stood, chest heaving, her body trembling with the aftermath of the battle. Her senses were alive with the thrill of victory, but the boy, the child, still needed her. With Valen's help, they rushed to the altar, and as Elena reached the child, she knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she pressed her palm against his tiny chest. His golden eyes fluttered open, and for the first time since the ritual began, he smiled. Elena's heart leapt in her chest. The child was safe, and then as the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, casting a golden glow over the forest, Valen approached. His eyes were filled with awe, but there was something deeper there, something that spoke of destiny. He knelt beside her, his eyes never leaving hers. "The throne is yours," he said, his voice low and reverent, "if your heart allows it." The sun had risen, and the world was forever changed. Elena, once an Omega, now the guardian of a child whose bloodline was meant to alter the course of history. And Valen, a king who had seen his own world crumble, now finding in her not just a protector, but a fated mate. But the throne, would she accept the power that called to her, or would the weight of it break her? As the last embers of the fire faded into the morning light, the true test of their future began. Chapter 9. The day after the battle, after the fires had burned their last, a heavy silence settled over the land. It was the calm that follows a storm, when everything is still, but the echo of what has passed lingers in the air, filling every corner of the kingdom. And yet this silence was different. It wasn't the peace of surrender, but the quiet before something greater was set into motion. King Valen stood at the center of the throne room, his golden eyes fixed on the floor before him. The weight of his crown was heavy, but it was nothing compared to the burden of the future that now rested on his shoulders. Beside him, Elena was no longer the Omega she once was. She stood tall, her posture fierce and unwavering, the very essence of a woman forged by fire and fate. Together, they had shattered the old order. Together, they had defeated Morwen. And now, together, they would rebuild what had been torn apart. The doors to the throne room creaked open, and the council entered, silent, expectant. They had watched as the sun rose, as the ashes of Morwen's reign fell away, and now they came to witness the beginning of a new era. Valen spoke first, his voice low, but filled with a power that echoed through the halls. Morwen's name shall be erased from the histories. She shall be forgotten. She will never touch the bloodline again. His words hung in the air like the silence of a dying storm. The council members shifted uncomfortably, but none dared to speak. There was no room for debate. The usurper had been vanquished, and there was only one path forward. Elena stepped forward, her hand resting gently on the child, Prince Kale, who sat beside her on the steps leading up to the throne. His golden eyes were wide with innocence, unaware of the burden that had already begun to weigh heavily on his small shoulders. He was safe now. He was home. The child is to be declared the rightful heir, Elena's voice rang out, firm, unyielding. Prince Kale will lead this kingdom into a new era. Valen turned to her, his gaze softening just for a moment. He could feel the bond between them growing, the connection strengthening with every passing moment. She was his mate, his equal, his partner in everything. Together, they would rule this kingdom. But Elena, as always, had a vision that was larger than just the throne. As the council murmured, Elena's eyes swept over the room, her gaze fierce but compassionate. But there is one condition. Valen's brows furrowed. He hadn't expected this. He had expected the words of a queen, a woman who had fought and bled for a throne. But Elena wasn't like other women. She had always been different. "Go on," he said, his voice measured, though part of him already knew what was coming. Elena's eyes locked onto his. "I will not rule as a queen of blood. I will not wear a crown forged from the suffering of my people." Her voice trembled for the briefest of moments, but she held herself steady. "I will rule as a queen of peace. I will protect the Omegas, the forgotten wolves, the ones cast aside. I will ensure they have a place in this kingdom. I will make sure they are never again treated as lesser. I will fight for the lost and the broken, as I once was." Her words struck a chord deep within Valen's chest, a chord that resonated with a truth he hadn't fully understood until now. She was his equal, she was his mate, and together they would build something greater than mere power. They would build a kingdom of balance, of justice, where no one was ever left behind. He took a step closer to her, his hand reaching for hers, and as he did, the room fell into complete silence. "My queen," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "You will rule beside me, but we will rule together, not in the shadow of what was, but in the light of what will be. The people will know peace and justice." A soft murmur of agreement rippled through the council, and in that moment, Elena felt something stir deep within her. This was it, the beginning of a new world, a world where love, unity, and strength would carry them forward, a world where no one would ever feel forgotten again. But before they could speak further, a figure appeared at the door, a lone priest, his robes flowing around him like a shroud. His eyes were wide with urgency, his breath coming in short gasps. The room fell silent once more, the tension thickening in the air. Valen's gaze hardened. "What is it?" His voice was low, but the king's authority rang through it. The priest, trembling, approached with a scroll clutched in his hands. His voice was strained, as if he had been holding onto this knowledge for far too long. "My king, my queen, the prophecy is not over. There is more to this tale than we had thought." The council's murmurs rose in a ripple of confusion. Elena's heart skipped a beat. She had fought for this, fought for Chaol, fought for Valen, fought for their future. Was there more? The priest unrolled the ancient scroll with reverence, his fingers trembling as he traced the faded, time-worn script. "In the east," he whispered, "another power awakens, a force of unimaginable strength, one that will change everything. This power is linked to the bloodline, and it cannot be ignored." Elena's eyes narrowed, her mind racing. "Who is it?" she asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. The priest hesitated for a moment before speaking. "It is a force born of both light and darkness, a creature forged in the very fires of the prophecy, a being who will either rise to unify the kingdom or tear it apart." Valen's jaw clenched. The tension in the room was palpable, as if every single person in that hall knew that their world had just shifted once again. Elena felt it too. The weight of what was to come settled over her like a storm cloud. She had always known that there was more to this prophecy than anyone had imagined, but she had hoped, for just a moment, that peace would be within their grasp. The priest's voice trembled as he finished. "The prophecy does not end here. It is only just beginning." The room was deathly silent, and then, from the corner of her eye, Elena saw Valen turn his gaze to her, his golden eyes locking onto hers with a depth that sent a shiver down her spine. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice thick with a mixture of uncertainty and determination. "Are we ready to face what comes next?" As the weight of the priest's words lingered in the air, the future seemed uncertain once more. The prophecy, which had seemed so clear, was now shrouded in mystery, filled with whispers of power yet unseen, of a force that could either heal the kingdom or destroy it. Elena had thought she had won, thought peace was within her grasp, but the world, it seemed, was not finished with them yet. There was another chapter to this tale, another test to their strength, and another mystery to unravel. As the last embers of the day faded into twilight, one thing was certain. This was not the end. It was only the beginning. Chapter 10. The moon hung low in the night sky, a silver beacon that bathed the world in its pale glow. Beneath it, the kingdom of the Lycans, its stone walls, its tall towers, its sprawling forests, was still, its heart quiet, at peace for the first time in an age. Yet beneath that peaceful exterior, Elena could feel it, the heavy weight of the future pressing in on her. But tonight was different. Tonight, she could finally breathe. Valen stood beside her, his presence both a comfort and a force. His eyes were the color of the golden dawn, filled with a depth of emotion she had never thought possible. He was hers, and she was his. Their bond was unbreakable now, forged through fire, blood, and destiny. Beside them, Chaol played with a small stone, his innocent laughter breaking the silence. A child born of prophecy, and yet in this moment he was simply a boy, alive, safe, loved. His tiny fingers clenched the stone, and as he looked up at them, his eyes glimmered with the same golden hue as his father's. Elena's heart swelled with emotion as she looked at the child who had come to mean everything to her. He was her purpose now. She had vowed to protect him, to protect the future of this kingdom, and she would honor that vow no matter what came. But there was more to her now. There was power coursing through her veins, something ancient, something moon-blessed. The mark on her hand, a silver crescent, gleamed under the light of the moon. The same crescent that had been left on her skin in the wake of the battle, in the wake of the ritual. It was a sign, a symbol of who she had become. "Do you feel it?" Valen's voice was low, as though speaking to her meant something more now than it ever had. She nodded, her hand instinctively reaching for the mark. The silver glow pulsed gently beneath her fingertips, like a heartbeat, like a life force all its own. "I feel everything," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She could feel the legacy of the Lycan queens, of those who had ruled before her. She could feel the echoes of battles fought long before her time, and she could feel the future that was just beginning to unfold. Valen's eyes never left her face as she traced the mark, his expression unreadable, yet filled with something deep. "You're no longer just an Omega," he said, the words heavy in the air between them. "You're a force. You've always been, and now the world will know it." Elena swallowed hard, her emotions threatening to spill over. It was true, she realized. She was not just the Omega she had once believed herself to be. She was something more, something greater, and yet with that power came responsibility. "I'm ready," she said softly, more to herself than to him. "I will protect this kingdom. I will protect our son." Her words carried the weight of a promise, one she had made in the deepest parts of her heart. This was her destiny now. Valen reached out, his hand brushing against hers. There was something tender in his touch, something that spoke of all the battles they had fought together, all the moments of loss and pain that had led them here. He didn't need to say anything. His presence said it all. Together, they had faced the storm. Together, they had rebuilt the world that had been shattered. Together, they would face whatever the future held. And then, as the moonlight bathed them in its ethereal glow, Elena knew that she had found her place in this world. For the first time, she was truly free. The darkness that had once haunted her every step, no longer had the power to control her. She was no longer a victim of fate, no longer a pawn in a game she didn't understand. She had become the very force that would shape the future. And standing here, beside Valen and their son, she understood one thing more than anything else. This was just the beginning. Her gaze shifted back to the silver crescent on her palm, the mark that now signified not just her bond to Valen, but to the very heart of the kingdom. "Let them come," she whispered under her breath, her voice steady with a strength she had never known before. "I am not afraid anymore." Her words were a promise to herself, to Valen and to their son, a promise to the kingdom, and to the world. As she stood there, her fingers entwined with Valen's, their child safely nestled between them, she could feel the weight of the prophecies shift. The storm was over, but the legacy of love, war, and destiny, that was just beginning. This story, dear listeners, is more than a romance. It is a legacy of love, of war, and of destiny. The journey of Elena, the Omega who changed everything, is one that will resonate with all who dare to believe in the power of fate, of heart, and of the bonds that tie us all together. You have just heard the beginning of Marked by the Lycan King, a tale where the threads of fate have woven together something far more powerful than anyone could have imagined. Elena's strength, her love, her defiance, they have rewritten the future of this kingdom, and her place in it is now set in stone. But remember, dear listeners, the end is never truly an end. The moon will rise again, and with it, the story of Elena, Valen, and Chaol will continue, their destinies still entwined with the shifting tides of the world. So as the full moon continues to shine over the kingdom, remember, this is a story of love, of survival, and of the unbreakable will of a woman who chose to fight, who chose to live, and who chose to love. And as we close tonight's tale, ask yourself, what would you do if you were marked by destiny? Thank you for joining us on this journey. This is only the beginning. And if you believe in the power of love and destiny as much as we do, subscribe to I Love Romance Stories. Don't miss the next chapter in this world of fate, fury, and forbidden love. And remember, love can change even the darkest destiny. Like, comment, and share if you believe in the magic of true love.